Well, good morning. Let's go ahead and call to order our Thursday, May 18th, 2023, Truckee Meadows Water Authority meeting. And can I have a roll call?
Anderson,
Here?
Breckus. Here. Dare,
Here.
Dewar,
Here.
Hill. Here. Garcia,
Here.
Taylor.
Here.
Zimmerman. Here. Dale. Ferguson, thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, if you don't mind. Ms. Hill, would you lead us?
Yes, sir. After me. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's go and open to public comment. I do want to remind you that our public comment for this meeting, we do that at the very beginning, at the very end. And so if you have something you'd like to share, either do it now or be thinking about it real hard because we can't wait to hear from you. Anybody? Okay. Possible board comments or acknowledgements? Anybody from the board have anything they'd like to share? Okay. I'm looking for an approval of the agenda or if there's any questions regarding our agenda.
Move to approve.
I have a first. I have a second. Paul Anderson. And any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? I hear none. That passes unanimously. Thank you so much. Now we're looking for the approval of the minutes of the April 19th, 2023 meeting of the Tumwa Board of Directors. Looking for a motion or if anybody has a discussion.
Move to approve.
I have a first. Do I have a second? Ms. Breckus, second. And any other discussion? And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? I see none. Ms. Dewar, I see left the room for a moment. Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to I didn't want her to come in and go, no. So, okay, we're moving on to discussion and action and possible direction to staff for the ratification of the collective bargaining agreement between Tumwa and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 1245, and I think Andy Gephardt and Jessica Atkinson.
Hello. Before you have the agreement between IBW and Tumwa for the next 4 years labor. We feel it was a very fair contract, right in line with the other entities, and I'm here to, you have it, I know, I'm here to answer any questions if you have them.
Any comments or discussion? I'd like to share to our staff, those that are listening, and I'm sure they all listen in every time we get together and talk, so not really, I doubt that happens. But we want to say thank you for just walking this out with us, and good job on that to our staff and all of that. So this it's exciting to see us all work together, especially during times where sometimes it's difficult to do. So this is very good.
It was I've been doing this since before we became Tumwa, and I've been doing every one of them since we've been Tumwa. This was by far the most collaborative, best negotiations teams on both sides that we've had. I mean, the bargaining units team was respectful, understood. We all listened. We all traded ideas, and it was really a collaborative effort.
That's fantastic.
So I do want to say we do have somebody in the audience, Jordan Groh, who some from the county may know, but anyway, Jordan. She didn't like how I took notes, and I don't blame her. I'm a bad note taker. So Jordan really kept us on the straight and narrow, and so special recommendation for Jordan. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. So with that said, is there a motion to accept?
I'll move to approve the collective bargaining agreement between Tumwa and IBEW for a 4-year period beginning July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2027.
So I have a first. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Any more discussion? I see none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you very
So that
much.
passes unanimously.
And the
And I-
staff thanks you.
had every intention of welcoming Dale Ferguson from Woodburn Wedge, so I want to tell you thank you. I got going and got excited about everything, so thanks for being here today. So we are moving on to our public hearing on the adoption of our budget. So I'm going to hand this over to Matt Bowman and Danny Rotter.
All right. Good morning, members of the board. Matt Bowman, Chief Financial Officer at TUMWA, for the record. You have a staff report in front of you that is the proposed final budget for TUMWA for the fiscal year 2024. That's on the operating budget side. And then also, you should have a copy of our 5-year CIP for fiscal years 2024 through 2028. I want to give a big shout out on that CIP document. I know we get a lot of kudos on that and a lot of work goes into it. I want to give a big shout out to Danny, who's up here, Sandra Tozy, who's in the crowd, and Sonia Folsom for putting that document together. It's really a compressed schedule to get it together once we finalize the budget, get all the pictures in there, and publish it. So big thanks to them for putting that together. On the operating budget side, I want to give big thanks to the TUMWA finance staff. So that includes Sandra again, Sophie Cardinell, TUMWA's financial controller, who's back there, Anna Rodriguez, and Veronica Galindo, our 2 senior accountants. So really the preparation of the budget is, it's one of those things, as you know, you try to use the most recent useful information you have and then finalize the budget. And so there's a lot of hours that go into that compressed time frame. So a lot of hard work, but it comes together really well. So it also really involves all of TUMWA's staff. So from the CIP to the services and supplies budget, TUMWA's staff gets together. We build these budgets from the bottom up, looking at what we need to spend money on, understanding that every dollar we spend has to be passed through to ratepayers. So it's very important that we spend money efficiently and effectively. And so that's something we take a lot of pride in, and everybody across the organization understands that. That's really the messaging out of the finance department. And so really a collaborative process, and very thankful for that at TUMWA. Okay, so both of these budgets were presented in detail at the March meeting. The staff report in front of you highlights the changes from that proposed tentative budget to what you have now as the proposed final budget. As you can see, there were minimal changes. I'll hit the highlights. On the operating budget side, we have an increase to hydroelectric revenue of about $500,000. We have, as you can imagine, sustained river flows expected throughout the year. We also have less downtime during the years. We're going to optimize the revenue in the hydro plants this year as well. We do have a reduction in services and supplies expense of $87,000, various changes there. As more information becomes available, we make changes up and down, but a net decrease of about $87,000. And then a reduction in capital spend just in fiscal 24, $2.7 million due to changes in the CIP. And on the CIP specifically, we have a couple increases, one due to the Idlewild Booster Pump Station improvements, which we have updated costs for, so those costs are going up $2.5 million in the CIP. We have Chalk Bluff filter under drains, increase of about $1.5 million. Again, updated cost estimate. As we get more information in, we update the budget up through the most recent time that we can. And then we have various other changes in the CIP that accumulates a net decrease of about $700,000. So at the March board meeting, we talked in detail about how this budget, the operating budget, includes a debt service coverage ratio that's less than the board goal of 1.5 times. That's not something to be taken lightly, but I do believe that this budget is still conservative, and I also believe that ratio is temporary. And so I think that we could end up closer to 1.5 times by the end of the fiscal year, because I don't believe we will overspend in the budget. In fact, I think we'll be lower. We've gotten some indicators that will happen. Specifically, we're expecting reduced power costs in 2024. I think we all are hoping for and expecting that. In some of our discussions with NV Energy, we think that will happen, and that has a big impact on TUMWA's budget. And then I also just want to remind the board that we are in the process of working on a long-term rate plan. So our final scheduled rate increase, an approved rate increase of 2.5% is going into effect June 1st. Beyond that, we don't have any rate increases scheduled, and there's nothing built into this budget for that. So we're in the process of a long-term plan that we will come back with anticipated rate increases that will also help the debt service coverage ratio. So that's the main stuff in the staff report. There is a recommended motion in there, and we are asking the board to acknowledge that this budget includes a debt service coverage ratio that is less than the board goal of 1.5 times. And with that, we'll take any questions. Danny's here to answer any questions on the CIP if you have any.
What's going to go to the board? Ms. Breckus?
Yeah, thank you. You know, because I know it's such a focus of your division, I want to, congratulate you and then give you a little reader feedback on some of the formatting. And I love public budgeting, and it's been great to be involved with TUMWA because they do such a great job on it. It's really enhanced my ability to understand and zero in on best practices. So one thing I think on your CIP is how your tables run as in the thousands up above on each one. It's not easy on the reader, I gotta tell you. I know it's a formatting issue. You'd probably have to bind your CIP, those pages landscape. I think it's probably the way to do it. And then 1.5 for million, you don't have to run that many zeros. Just reader feedback. Another thing is on your, I think for each CIP, for a project that has had some FY funding, I think you should explain for each one, if it's gone through design or whatever, what in the current FY has been budgeted and what the source is. And the reason I bring that out is you've got some big ones there, and CIPs can be wish lists. And it's a wish list that only is going to happen if something happens back in DC. We all know that, right? But as things mature, it's a good indicator of if it's maturing, a project is moving forward on local dollars. So that's a good way to show, if you've got one that's already gone forward, what money's coming to the table on that already. And then maybe even more sophisticated on the out years, say this is only going to happen in out years if we get some federal relief or something. And same too, you've got some reimbursement ones that hang out there and read a little bit odd. It's like, who's buying that? Who's paying for that? That's a little bit of feedback. And then maybe some that are annual, I would just put the term annual. It's the annual this, annual that. So we know it's not a big CIP, it's just a CIP expenditure that we do every year. We call it the annual, and that I think helps the reader understand what's more operational CIP versus what is a big investment in the system. But the two substantive questions I had, and thank you for allowing me to continue on, Mr. Chair, is that you're showing that we might need another double diamond well, and it said because of growth. And that was a flag for me from a policy position, because I always hear, well, we're so, TRO has done so well for us, and we really watch groundwater pumping. And then I'm hearing, I think I'm interpreting in the CIP, you want another well in the southeast growth side of the valley. We're having growth to pump groundwater. And I'm like, oh, I've never heard that one. And then the other question is something about, so that's one question. The other one was, you show some upsizing and improvements for fire flows. You've got some areas where you're only 100 GPM. And, I've been on this board for a while. I've never really seen any mapping or understanding of, where we're not meeting some fire flow standards. That was like, yikes. So those two questions.
Yeah, so Danny Rotter, Director of Engineering for the record. On the question regarding the Double Diamond well, we have that in there because it's part of our facility plan for the 20-year build-out. But it's been one of those ones that we've continued to monitor and watch which projects do come to fruition. So there is a project, actually Talus, Daybreak, that has planned the backbone facility with more booster station supply to bring more service water that way. So it's really more of a, well, if that project goes, then we can push off the well, but we do need the well at some point to provide build-out capacity in South Truckee Meadows. So we're always looking at those projects that are part of the facility plan that we need to meet 20-year growth, and kind of the just-in-time manufacturing of, well, if we can't get that pump station through Talus Valley, and we do need to bring on groundwater to meet peak day in our conjunctive use plan, then we have that in there. That is one that we continue to push out and say, okay, we need to have it in there so that we're ready, but it can be further out. So I think it's at the end of the 5-year CIP for that. And I just forgot your second
was-
question. Fireflow.
It was how many areas are we deficient on a standard fire flow? 100, I think you said 100 GPM, you got some spots?
So that's 1,000 GP.
Oh, it's 1,000, okay, I wrote it down. I
So-
thought it was that, okay.
Each year with or each 5-year with our facility plan, we look at each area and we say, okay, in 1930, when this subdivision was developed, 500 gallons a minute might have been the fire flow. Nowadays, we'd like to see 1,000. And so we identify those areas. They've been that way, but we identify them and say, okay, let's try and schedule them and improve them as we go. It's not we have to do it, but it is an area to identify that, hey, we're deficient here. Before we allow new growth here, we redevelop something, let's make sure that we're starting to tackle these as we go. So there's a number of areas in the old county and STEMGID systems that those are the majority in the CIP that I'm aware of. There are a few within the core where we have a couple upsizing identified, but a lot of those times what we'll do is we'll identify them like in an older area of Old Southwest or something where there's 4-inch pipes and we go to replace them because they're old and outdated. Well, then we'll update it to 8-inch, hitting 2 birds with 1 stone.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I think something in the future, and I think we can bring back when we talk about CIP. I don't disagree that I've not heard much information about what you just talked about in the past. So it'd be good for us to understand what you guys are thinking, just so we know when it comes to us, we're not like, where's this coming from? So thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, first I want to say thank you guys very much. Wonderful job on the budget as well as CIP. I cannot imagine, it must seem like a full-time job at some points. But I do have a question in regard to the services and supplies, the reduction of the 87,285. Everything we've been hearing and seeing from the city level is the opposite of that. We're seeing increases because of inflation and everything else involved in it. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about how we're going to save money there.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and that's something that up to the preparation and presentation of the tentative budget, we had multiple iterations of the services and supplies budget because the numbers that we were determining based on prior year actuals, expected increases due to inflation. We said this budget, it's too much. We need to really spend some more time, go back through it, and really nail down what we think is actually going to happen. And so we took some big chunks out of the budget at that point. And we continued to do that after the tentative budget, and so that's really what that reduction reflects. But there was some reductions as we move into our actual bidding process for next fiscal year, where we're starting to get a better idea of where some contracts are going to land. And so that reduced it. We also had some additional items we identified that we needed in the budget, and so we actually had to add a couple of things as well. So it really was a function of just updated information. And so we're not seeing, and I didn't build in anything into the budget that reflects truly reducing costs from inflation. As I said, I'm hopeful that we see that on the electric power side and on the chemical side as well. Right now, I think the budget is probably conservative in those two areas, but we don't know yet, and so I didn't want to reduce anything there. So really, those reductions are a result of updated information, continually scrutinizing what we have before we came to this final budget. And really, we want the budget to be as updated as possible so that when we're moving into the next year and somebody says, hey, I need to do this thing, the first question that we can ask is, was it budgeted? And then if it was, even though if we got it in right here before the final budget and it makes sense in the big picture, it's easier. Yes, go ahead and do it. If not, well, what aren't you going to do, or how are you going to offset those costs? So really, it's about updating the information with the most recent data available.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody over here? I have a couple of just thoughts. One is NV Energy promised their power are coming down, so I'd like to out loud hold them accountable to that. I heard the news review, I heard them say it, and so anybody out there at NV Energy, we are hoping that we get to see those do come down. One question I do have, though, has to do with when it's wet. What I've seen is we tend to sell less water, obviously, and we're going to have, is that put into this thought of what you're doing? I'm sure it is, but I just want to officially hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing a later start to the irrigation season this spring, to the effect of it's going to affect this year's revenue, 1%, 2%, 3%, something in that ballpark. It hits us in like the April timeframe. Historically, that's when people start turning on their water. That was delayed this year. Our April revenues were much lower than they were the year before, and that we see historically. So what we're doing, and I'll go into a little detail about this because it's important. What we base our budget on is historical consumption, and that factors in these fluctuations in revenue or in consumption due to weather. And so we factor that into the budget that we present. Long term, I mentioned we're working on our rate plan, which is really a long-term forecast. We're going to look at what kind of scenarios can weather impact us on the revenue side, and try to put some guardrails around that to look at what could be a good year, what could be a low year, and then when we come to the board with that, we'll be able to talk about that, because it can move the budget millions of dollars one way or another in those shoulder seasons in the spring and the fall. And so this year was the largest decrease that I've seen since I've been at Tumwa, because of the wet and cold temperatures in the late winter, early spring. Great for our storage and our water supply, not so good for revenue, but that's okay. So that's definitely something that we're considering.
And I have one more just thought before, and then I know we have a public hearing that we're going to do, so anybody out there, if you want to prepare your mind for that, if you want to be a part of that, you have a chance to share. When it comes to the rate increase, I just want to, for me, I want us to say, it'd be good to have some options there. I say that we are very concerned, and I say this, I can say we, because we've had these conversations over the years of people on fixed incomes, you name it, all of those kind of things. And so some options to look at as we go. Inflation is high, we are all seeing it, and we have citizens that are hurting. And so when you talk about rate increases, I want to put on that this is not taken lightly, and we want to make sure that that'll be a robust conversation for me.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And with that said, I'm going to open up for public hearing. Anybody out there that has anything they'd like to share? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that and bring back to the council, to our council. And with that said, I'm looking for a motion or more discussion. Do you have a motion? You can do.
move.
So moved. Who said it? Ms. Breckus? Do I have a second? I have a second. Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good job. Passes unanimously. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering questions. Okay. So now we're on to number 9, presentation, interviews, and selection of board general counsel per request for proposal and qualifications. I want to give some understanding of what's going to happen so we can explain. I say this, I do know that I have a couple gentlemen right over here. If I get it wrong, they will correct me quickly. Or if there's anything you want to add, please let me know. This has come about, and it's something we are looking at who's going to represent us as this board. Now, it's important we know that. This does not mean they go in and represent Tumwa and all these other things, because Tumwa has a lot of other legal factions and what they do, but here is what we're talking. The way this will work is candidates, we have 4 different candidates. One did back out, if you did not hear that. And so we're going to take each one. The rest will leave the room during that time, so it's fair. We will have 5 minutes for opening statements to the board, and then we'll take 10 minutes for questions for each one will be our goal, which kind of means please take a moment and really think about what you want to ask. And obviously, each candidate's going to be a little bit different, but what would help us as a group is if you have a vein that you tend to care about and it's really important to you, you might want to stay on that because we kind of stay in the same lanes. Then there are some questions that have been provided just as a guide. That's all they are. A lot of us have done this, so we might have particular questions we want. Feel free to ask what you'd like. This is our counsel that we're looking for, and we want to make a good decision today. So I'd ask, do you have anything else to share with that, Mr. Zimmerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get started, I believe Board Member Dewar has a disclosure that she would like to make.
Yeah, exactly, if this is the right time. I wanted to go on the record and disclose that I have in the past, and I may in the future, hire the Parsons Bailey Law Firm for our private business. They are the registered agent on one of our, number of our companies. That just requires receipt of service if something happens legally. Nothing has ever happened to date. But we do not currently have any lawsuits, law cases, contracts, or anything under their review or their participation. And so I just wanted to go on the record with that disclosure. And I don't know if there's questions from my colleagues or anyone about that. So I wanted to do a full disclosure. I have consulted with our counsel. Apparently it does not rise to the level of recusal. So I will be participating in today's evaluations.
I just say thank you for the disclosure, and I think those are important, but I do think in the town we live in and how we function, we're always going to bump into each other a little bit, but thank you for making
Yeah.
sure it's clear. Any other questions, concerns? Okay, we did do a random order. I say we, I had nothing to do with it. Staff just kind of put numbers in a hat and pulled them out. And so this will be the order by which we will go. McDonald Corano will go first, Parsons Bell second, Paul Liparelli third, and then Fenimore Craig fourth. So we will go ahead and in that, if you're not one of the first ones, we're going to ask that you go outside and hang out, chat, get a coffee. Don't go too far. But let's go ahead and begin. During this process, if any of our colleagues do have any questions, I ask that we don't interrupt him during, or them, or her, or whoever during their 5 minutes. But then after that, we can ask whatever questions. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, members of the board. I'm very happy to be here. I really appreciate being included in the board's consideration. By way of introduction, I just wanted to make a couple of points. One is I think that the board's consideration of this position is timely. Obviously, there are a number of new faces on the board. The leadership of the board is different from when I transitioned into the position of board counsel after Mr. Pawnee left. And I think it would be remiss if I didn't mention that. At that time, I feel like there were a number of issues that were pending that were somewhat sticky that required consultation with certain members of the board and that were addressed in board meetings. The organization itself was undergoing a leadership change with Mr. Forey leaving. And the departure of Mr. Pawnee, I think, was significant because he had represented the board for a number of years. And so I think that transition probably could have been better. And I think some of the circumstances contributed to the fact that there wasn't better communication between myself and some members of the board as it related to expectations. But I think that going forward, given the turnover and the fact that you're looking at this again as an opportunity to reset with whomever you choose. That said, I also wanted to note that the reason that we continue to be interested in working as board counsel for Tumwa is that, part of the ethos of our firm is working with public agencies. We have a number of lawyers, including myself, who have spent considerable time in their careers working for government in various respects. And we don't always get the chance to really carry forward those interests in our professional work as members of a private law firm. Representing Tumwa and other organizations like Tumwa, as we do, is a way that we can do that, and it's an important part of what we do and how we think about ourselves as a part of this community. That's reflected not only in the interest that we have in the position and continuing to work with Tumwa and supporting a group that we've supported for a number of years since its inception, but it's also reflected in our rates and the approach we take to that here. And it's also reflected in the way we think about conflicts. I know there's been some questions about that over the years, and I can address that more later if there are more questions. But I just wanted to point out that our relationship as a firm with Tumwa is important to us, and it provides, there's an institutional awareness of the importance of that relationship, right? We've always represented Tumwa. We were there at the beginning. We want to continue to be there through its life. And so while I may be the person standing here today talking to you about this, everyone in the firm understands that we have that relationship, and they look out for that relationship. And that contributes to our ability to offer substantially reduced rates. It contributes to our ability to identify potential conflicts as they may come up. And it helps us shape our business so that we can continue to cultivate that relationship and provide important service. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Let's go ahead and begin.
Sorry. And I appreciate that, and I've enjoyed working with you. I think you have a really very calm demeanor when you're sitting up here with us, and I've enjoyed working with you. But I do want to pose questions about that concern of ethic. And the concern that I have, and I'll mention it to the others, is that a company here with a diverse, a law firm here with a diverse book that maybe have an ethos, as you mentioned, to do public sector work, can also use that role as a part of our public organizations to advance private client interests. And so each of you has prepared how you manage conflicts. Some of those are, it's multifaceted. Your bar laws, rules, the Nevada ethics laws, our bylaws, your contract, a lot. But to me, I go to appearances. That's the standard I hold. And I just want to ask you if you think that it poses an appearance issue, if appearances are problematic to you, to have down here, sitting next to all of us who are elected here with the public trust, to have you up here as an equal with us in the view of perhaps our staff. And we have a lot of finance staff today. We don't have the engineering side, or local government side, but sometimes they get called into meetings, regularly to meet with, if not, you or Mr. Pogny, one of your partners who they know is a partner in your firm to go over very complicated discovery issues, for example, on behalf of a development client. A lot of discretion, a lot of authority. Is there a concern that you would have that appearance to staff who has to go in and make very difficult decisions being lobbied by one of your partners could have an appearance problem, knowing that you are sit up here and as an equal to us?
I think I would answer it. Well, it's a multifaceted question, so I'll say a couple of things. One is, I think we have to, when you think about conflicts, they are situational in general. And so you have to start by looking at the acute scenario and what's happening, and is there or is there not a conflict per the rules that we operate by. And then you can kind of move out from that and talk about whether there's an appearance of impropriety or another kind of institutional concern that has to be addressed. Do I consider it concerning to be sitting as a board counsel when there are potentially meetings that may take place with staff and other members of the law firm on issues that are not before the board? I do not. The reason I don't is, one, staff has never raised a concern like that to me. So I assume that they don't feel uncomfortable with a scenario that you've outlined, assuming that is a scenario that's taken place. To my knowledge, it isn't, but I'm not saying it doesn't take place, okay? I don't do those meetings, so I don't know. The other thing I would say is, in the time that I've been sitting here with the board, no other member of my law firm has ever presented an item to the board or had a client present an item to the board, to my knowledge. And so I'm not aware of there being any actual situation where I may have provided advice to the board that was that had to do with a matter that somebody else in the law firm had provided advice on. And so you've posed a hypothetical. I appreciate that the hypothetical you pose may present concerns to you, but it remains a hypothetical to me because it's not a scenario that I'm aware of having taken place. And part of the reason that I don't think it has taken place is because that is what our conflict checks are about. And that's why we keep in mind the various roles and responsibilities that we have for our various clients when we're evaluating whether we can do something on behalf of one party or another. And so when we identify an issue that could be problematic, the first thing we do is we talk to Mr. Zimmerman about whether he feels it's problematic or not, and then we would work out per our rules what we can or cannot do. But I would go back to the point I made about institutional awareness. I mean, as a law firm like we are, we are not just taking every matter that comes through the door that isn't a specific conflict for us, right? We have a business strategy. We are shaping our business to do the type of work we want to do and to maintain relationships that are important to us. And so we do think about whether we can take something on, given our relationship with TUMWA and the appearance it might have to people like you on this board, regardless of whether it's a conflict per the rules. And that may not give you all the comfort you're looking for, but it is a part of our process.
Please let me go to some other board members. I want to make sure, just please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Folletta, for applying for this and for all your work on behalf of TUMWA. I like this question that staff put together for us of, please describe a difficult situation you encountered representing boards or agencies and how you handled it.
Well, I would say that transitioning to the role of board counsel presented a difficult situation in representing boards. You had a longtime board counsel who most people on the board were very familiar with. Certainly the chair of the board had worked with for a number of years in that capacity and in multiple capacities. You had a longstanding general manager who was ready to transition to, out of that position. And there was a complicated personnel issue that was presented. And so, and during that period of time, not only was I transitioning into the role, but your existing counsel was transitioning out, but not fully out, right? So this wasn't a he stops, I start scenario. And so the relationship between myself, the board chairman, staff had to be managed, and the individual members of the board who were raising concerns about the problem. I chose to go about that by taking my lead, if you will, from the board chair and the lead staffs, and then communicating with the relevant board members as appropriate in order to maintain the integrity of that process. In those situations, not everybody's going to be happy, because I think naturally as members of the board, you're going to want as much information as possible about whatever situation is brewing, because you're naturally going to have an opinion about it. But it's not always the case that it's the prudent thing to do in terms of managing the legal risks of a scenario to provide any and all information immediately, to whomever might want it. It is appropriate to make sure that people are aware as the decisions need to be made, but sometimes you have to manage that process for the benefit of everybody involved and the protection of everybody involved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members?
I have a question.
Please.
And I haven't fully formulated the question, so bear with me. But we employ a variety of attorneys at TUMWA. So there's board counsel. We've had Stephanie providing, general counsel. What would be her term that she has provided? General counsel for the agency. We've hired external counsel to provide information on specific issues. That could be personnel, could be water related. And I was just wondering how you see the interaction of all of these different attorneys. Like, what's your role, or do you have interaction in the past? Yeah. And how would you expect that to unfold?
That's a good question, and I appreciate you asking it, because I think it is my perception that there may have been a different type of interaction before I took over between prior attorneys and those other folks. So in my experience as board counsel, I have very limited interactions with other counsel who are retained by TUMWA to work on other things, right? The role of board counsel is specific more or less to these meetings. You help prepare the agendas. You look at minutes after the fact. If there are procedural questions that people anticipate arising, you might address those in preparation for the meeting, and then you do the meeting itself. But I'm not responsible day to day for assigning legal work, even in my own law firm, to other people who are doing, let's say, subject matter specific work, water, employment, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. I'm not responsible for liaising with lawyers in other law firms who are doing work for TUMWA in those areas. I did have occasion to communicate to some degree with like, for example, employment counsel as it related to issues that were coming before the board to ensure that procedurally that was handled appropriately. But I certainly do not function as general counsel to TUMWA in any way. Now, I think that is different than how it may have been handled in the past. I don't know that, I think actually at the outset of TUMWA, when TUMWA was first created, I think our law firm actually did serve as general counsel for a number of years and handled all of the things you're talking about. And over time, that has shifted as TUMWA has brought on more legal talent internally, which I think is appropriate as the organization grows. And so at this point, with respect to this RFP, I think the instructions that the chair gave at the outset is really true, which is that we're really talking about a fairly narrow scope of work.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. when I think of this position, I think of it more just that, what you just said, as far as the open meeting law and all that portion of it, that you're going to guide us there. But I think of this as more of the softer side of it. And again, thanks to staff for this question. I like this one. It's the vision at Tumwa to enhance the quality of life in the Truckee Meadows by delivering exceptional customer-focused water services. So in your role as our council, what would you say is one of the primary things you can be doing for us to help us to achieve that vision?
I think the most important thing I could do in that role is to ensure the transparency of the board's deliberations and the proceedings that happen here. You know, whether there's a lot of members of the public who come at any particular meeting or not is not really the point. I mean, the board's proceedings need to be not just compliant with the law, but with the spirit of the law, so that not only people know what's going on, but so that you can discuss and deliberate amongst yourselves as fully and freely as you want to. And that does go, I think, to my general view, which is that, you know, less is more from board council, right? Like, and that is just my opinion, but I really think it should be a rare occurrence that someone speaks up and says, you know, that's kind of out of bounds or not out of bounds, or you may want to rework that idea. Anytime you do that, you run the risk of inadvertently or intentionally driving the policy discussion, and that's not the appropriate place for board council to be. So it would really be, I think, you know, enhancing transparency as best as possible.
So we're going to run out of time here, but I do want to kind of put some practical something out there. So McDonald Corrado has been served well. And so first of all, I just want to say that out loud. In my opinion, we've seen that. We have history with you, obviously, and it was during a transition that you found yourself going, you know, figuring out your space. And with that said, the part that I'm looking for, and I just, if you could speak to it, is I definitely want whoever our council is to be present and fully accounted for it. And not that you have not, but we were used to a different setting of what that looked like. Reality. You mentioned it, so I can mention it. And it's not an insult. You're just different people, and you have a different approach, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would say when it comes to our future of what we do, this is, it is very important that even if it's a narrow view of what the whole job is, this is what we're asking. We do want to ask that whoever sits in that seat is and I said, I think I've seen you in the last month to 2 months start speaking up more. If I'm just being straight.
Sure.
I've seen you show more of that, and I think you're kind of finding your legs where that fits. I would ask in the future, how do you see that working? Do you feel like, do I have an accurate understanding of my perception?
Yeah, I think the temperament and the level of activity that you get from board council is really established by the expectations of the board. So you expressing that is helpful to me. I think that if you're comparing two different people and two different approaches, you should also keep in mind the nature of the work that I think your prior board council did, and it goes to the question Ms. Durr asked. You know, your prior board council was, I think, more integrated in the day-to-day operations of the organization. Yeah. And so was not only maybe more familiar with the matters that were coming before the board, but was involved. Whereas I am not involved, and that's not a criticism, it's just a fact, right?
It is what it is.
And so, you know, whereas you might have saw over the last few months, you know, for example, Ms. Morris would come to the table a lot and provide explanations, right? That's because I think appropriately so, Ms. Morris was involved internally day to day working up these matters. Whereas, you know, as board council, you see what staff wants you to see in preparation for the meeting, and you tee it up and you make sure the meeting works. And so I take your commentary and I hear what you're saying. I think what that would require is probably a higher level of initiative on the part of board council to make sure that they really are aware and steeped in the specific matters that come before the board if you're looking for input like that from your board council.
Thank you. I do want to say that I think you've done a good job, and your firm and everybody, I tell you, that's the one thing that I do as we walk through this. It's always interesting to do this out in public. No other company has to do what we do and have these conversations, and so it's a strange place to be. But I do want to say that, and so whatever happens today, we appreciate your service. And I would say, and on behalf of McDonald Corrado, just please let that be known.
Could I ask one follow-up?
Sure.
I know we're running short of time, but this is pretty simple. Following up on Ms. Breckus's question, I mean, do you personally at the firm or the firm generally represent developers in development cases?
In development cases, I do not do development
Like
work.
permitting, applying for entitlements, zoning, those kind
No,
of things? You
no.
don't personally?
I don't personally do entitlement, land use work, that kind of thing.
Right. What about other members of your firm?
Oh, certainly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will just, for the group, share that has been challenging because your predecessor would often show up at, for example, Reno City Council and be representing clients. And often, there was a bit of a tangle with the council because they were advocating firmly on behalf of their client. And we had some hard questions to be answered if it came to city council. And it was sometimes, I'll just be honest, whether it's legal or not legal, it was awkward to be putting that person on, essentially having to have them potentially even go against us as their employer over here, but over there, they're advocating a position. And it's not McDonald Corrado alone. We had this with a couple of people, that we had in other board council positions too. So I'm sharing the thing. It may not be a legal conflict, but it is a challenge.
Thank you.
So, okay.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we're going to, just for sake of time,
Mr.
keep going
Chair,
forward. Is there
if I-
anything I'm missing?
Mr. Chair, if I may ask you a question. I realize that we put a time constraint on this, but I honestly feel this is a big enough decision that we should maybe look at flexing on time. I'm actually interested in hearing, the other members that may have some questions and they haven't had the opportunity to do so.
I don't think, yeah. I keep looking at them.
Mr. Chair,
They won't make eye contact with me, which means they have nothing to share.
just real quickly.
Yes.
For the record, so Ms. Folsom is just counting down the time when the applicant is speaking. So when the board members are asking questions, that does not count against
that's good.
the applicant's
good.
time. Just to be clear, we want to make sure every candidate has equal time. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Ferguson about allowing more time.
Yeah, the only comment I had, Chair, was that we should make sure each candidate has equal time in their presentation before the board.
Very good. Thank you. So we'll find out whatever time this was and try to keep it to that. Fair enough. So with that said, is there anything else you'd like to say before you
No,
go?
just thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, sir.
While we're having a change of people, I have a question for our staff team. Can you go over again how you want us to rate? Is it one number as a numerical rating of a ranking, or is it are we rating on different characteristics or?
Sure. Thank you, Member Dorr. So for this, at the end of this, we'll do a ballot process because the board in the past requested that we do the same process that the Western Regional Water Commission followed. And so after the conclusion of all candidate interviews, we'll give you a paper ballot and you will rank your top three. So number 1, number 2, and number 3, just a
Okay.
straight.
Just a 1, 2, 3?
Correct.
And not numerical, there's no 5 or 10?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then at the
It's an
conclusion.
ordinal ranking.
Yes, and then at the conclusion, I will read the votes of every single
Okay.
board member, and then you'll go into your deliberative process. You'll be able to vote and take a motion on who you want to hire, and you're not beholden to those poll results. Those poll results
Gotcha.
are just to,
Yeah,
That's just to get
Gotcha.
things in the right spot,
Correct.
and then we can all talk about it.
okay.
So we want to thank you for being a part of this process. I know it's a strange one to be interviewed out in public like this, so it's a fun one, but probably one you're probably used to. Please share your name so I know exactly who we're speaking to. And
Thank you. Yes, I'm Michael Keeley. I've been designated the contact person. I'm the managing partner of the Reno office of Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. I designated myself as that contact person only because I'm heavily involved in the administration of our office, and I have been since 2006. Things like conflicts of interest and whatnot come through me. I'm the designated Nevada individual to help resolve those, although we have multiple layers in that regard, and we have people in Salt Lake that we also consult with who are experts on that type of thing. My experience is in primarily in litigation. I've done environmental litigation, real estate litigation, commercial contract litigation. That would include geothermal litigation, water rights litigation in Pershing County, and I also represented the Clean Water Coalition when the legislative session in 2011 tried to confiscate all their funds, $62 million worth, and we prevailed on that case. And so that was a tricky governmental case because we had to sue the governor and the state controller and whatnot. But my experience is broad-based commercial litigation. I've also, in the distant past, have done litigation for the RTC. Their outside litigation. My partner was their general counsel, and so that included eminent domain, bus crashes, impact fee credits, labor and contract disputes, and things along that line. I would like to introduce the other members of my team. First, I would like to introduce Justina Caviglia. Some of you are familiar with Justina, and she comes to us recently as a lateral transfer from NV Energy. Justina has experience in public utility law, water law. She's worked for counties, and she's also very knowledgeable about the open meeting law. We do understand that the emphasis for this board is help with the open meeting law, and so that's why we have designated Justina to be that person who would be the day-to-day person. She's a recent lateral acquisition by our firm, and therefore she has the capacity and the desire to dedicate the time. She's available to meet the needs of TUMWA on a day-to-day basis. I'd also like to introduce Greg Morrison. Greg is a shareholder with our office. He came to us as a lateral transfer from Brownstein Hyatt, and he was doing water law there. Greg also has done work for the city of Fernley, helping with water rights, and he's very familiar with TROA. Justina also knows about TROA, but Greg has a very in-depth working knowledge regarding the Truckee River Operating Agreement. Also here is my partner, Sarah Ferguson. Sarah is a lateral candidate that we brought over from another firm in town. She's got about 10 years of experience in litigation, and she also, part of that experience is in employment law. So I know that occasionally TUMWA runs into employment issues, so we're prepared to service that need if it should arise. Also, here's my partner, Ashley Nickel. Ashley's been with us. She's a shareholder, and she's been with us for, over a decade now. Was a rising star. She did litigation, complex litigation, but then transitioned to take over natural resource practice and mining law, and is the go-to person for some of the largest mining companies in North America. Lastly, our newest addition is Jake Ward, and Jake, we listed him as bar admission pending, but since the time that we submitted our RFP, he's been sworn in. Jake is not fresh out of college. He went and got a master's degree, has an engineering degree in mining and water law. So he's got some real world experience before he starts to practice the law with us. He's been with us for, 6 or 8 months, Jake? Almost a year, yeah. So all of us are Reno-based. All of us live in the community. We're all water users. We're familiar with TUMWA, and many of us are familiar with people on this board or on the staff. Some of us have not just familiarity, but we have working relationships. And so we would like to, we're eager to develop that and enhance that working relationship. Like I said, we do understand the focus is on the open meeting law, but we wanted to present and let this board know that we have not only multiple talents, but multiple specialties. I guess my time's up already.
Yeah, we're doing a thing of 5-minute beginning, so go ahead and finish up.
Well, our approach to this position would be to listen and learn. We have not represented TUMWA on an ongoing basis in the past, just on select matters. But we understand that we would have to learn TUMWA's business and take direction from staff, but also know we understand that our primary obligation is to the board. And we have have to keep in mind the public interest as well. So that's how we would approach it. We would want to get to know Tumwa on an intimate basis in their day-to-day operations.
Thank you. We're going to go and open up to some questions from our board. So who wants to dive in? Go ahead. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I'm asking this question because you brought it up and it was part of the packet. So I guess either one of you can answer it, and thank you for being here. How would you describe the Truckee River Operating Agreement and its significance to Tumwa?
I'll have Greg answer that.
Hi, Greg Morrison. How would I describe it in simple terms? I mean, it's an incredible accomplishment to have put together all of these shareholders and stakeholders and who have come together to create this document that manages such a limited resource over such a broad group of shareholders between the tribe and the urban users and upstream users in California. So I think that's the simplest way to describe it, and I think I will avoid getting into any of the nuts and bolts.
Thank you. Hey, Bess. Ms.
Yeah,
Stewart.
before you go, I have about 3 questions. A quick one is, so following up on the previous question about TROA, but you were representing Fernley, is that correct?
That's
So a
correct,
very
yeah.
different perspective than Tumwa's perspective. And I was involved in the very early negotiations, but there was at least 6 parties, and they were all extremely well represented, and the people fought hard. We got through it. But I guess that would be a good follow-up, is just, can you switch your perspective? Here you would be potentially, not necessarily, representing a whole different party in that agreement.
Sure. By the time I started working on TROA, which was late 2012, when I got in, the Tumwa and the city of Fernley and all of the proponents of TROA had largely aligned and were all on the same side of that. So I think it was more during the negotiation process that there may have been,
Some harder feelings.
adverse interests. But as far as my understanding of TROA as the operational document, I'm actually a big fan of what it does for every stakeholder, so I don't believe it would take any shift in allegiance or focus.
And if, I don't know if there's. I have
Sure,
a-
go and do one more. and then
Okay, I'll
we
come back.
have one more over here.
I'll ask a similar question to the previous. So I was wondering, does your company represent any developers in terms of applying for entitlements, zoning changes, permits on behalf of people that are building stuff in Reno, Sparks, or Washoe County?
At the moment, I do not. I can't speak for all of my partners there, but if it had to do with water entitlements, it would likely be me who's doing it. And no, to the extent that I do any of that, I have been doing it in Southern Nevada.
Okay, so those are the 2 issues. One is, we've had people before represent clients to our council sitting with a different hat in our home jurisdictions. And then to have them sitting here as a potential, it's just an uncomfortable feeling. Not that they can't do that effectively, they can't separate, but it has been an issue, and I wanted to check it out. But to your point, there's also many developers come in, and specifically, maybe not an entitlement from our jurisdiction, but they're asking for help with getting their water rights, because some of them have to dedicate water rights over to Tumwa to get service. Are you aware, or even the primary person, would it be Justina, that would be representing? She's relatively new, but I guess, have you historically in your firm represented people coming in with water right entitlement types issues?
I don't know that I can speak to that. I've been with Parsons since 2016, so,
Okay, maybe Mr. Keeley?
yeah.
Traditionally, we haven't been a land use and development law firm. I mean, the people across the hall, Kemper Kroll, they do a lot of that.
Yes.
And there are other firms, of course, in town that do a lot of that. So
Okay.
it's not that we haven't had clients that have had to come to the table and dedicate or get dedicated water rights or dedicate water rights. For example, I represented the landowner in a sale that development became the FedEx distribution center. I thought it was outside the Tumwa service area at the time, but there were some issues there. But generally speaking, that's not a big part of our practice.
Okay, that's
Thank
helpful,
you.
thank you.
Ms. Hill.
Thank you. And I think this is for Justina because I'm assuming that you would be the attorney sitting up here on our monthly meetings, correct? That's what's envisioned?
That would be correct.
Okay, great. In the previous interview, it came up of the approach that you would take to this board of, how you feel, yes, your philosophy of being counsel to a public board.
So in my past life, when I worked for a county, I'd sat with various boards and commissions, and I always felt the role of the attorney is to be there to answer questions, but it's mainly to make sure that during the public meetings that you are not putting yourself in any danger with violating the open meeting law or saying things or doing things you're not supposed to. My role would not be to make a decision for you, would not be to help you make that decision, but just to provide the legal advice that you would need. I believe you need to have a working relationship with staff when you do that. Working with staff before the meeting, working with the board members during the meeting, and then making sure that you're also looking out for the public as part of that process as well.
May I have one more? No?
Sure.
Okay. I asked this from the previous interview, but could you please describe a difficult situation you encountered representing boards or agencies and how you handled it?
There's a few examples. Working with the county, I represented both some of the boards as well as elected officials. And at times, there are fights between the two of, do my employees...
Never.
Never. Do my employees work for me or do they work for you? And why are you giving them raises and not me? And it's difficult because you have to have multiple hats in that situation. So you need to listen to your client. You need to make sure that you're representing the client that you're entitled to represent at that time. Make sure they know they're being heard. They may not like the advice you have to give them, but sometimes you do have to give that advice that they need to hear before they make a decision or do something that would reflect poorly on them. So.
Thank you.
Ms. Breckus.
My question is really a variation on what I'm going to ask of all of you. But I'm not as familiar with your firm. So let me just, and it's restating a little bit of what Ms. Stewart brought up, but from my perspective, when you sit up here with us, you're viewed to the audience and the public as of an equal status with us, just by the virtue of the room's layout. And in that way, having that collegiality with us, I think imparts that we have your trust and you have our trust and a working relationship. And I've had concerns that can transcend into outside of this dais, particularly the presumptions, and I have worked as local government staff, for our staff, not only at our home jurisdictions, but TUMWA's staff, particularly when they have to go into very involved negotiations. We call it the discovery process. And if you or one of your partners is going into a discovery process about the parameters of new service, say, to a development, does that appearance that, the board is with our council and their interests enter into that room in staff's mind? And I have concern about that. I know that under the ethics laws, you have your bar rules, we have the Nevada rules, we have our bylaws, but I really focus on that appearance of conflict. And I've heard you don't have a lot of land use entitlement work, but let's call it what it is. Having this seat can help advance your land use entitlement work. And do you share that concern that bringing on a firm like this that then has a partner, who profit shares at the end of the year, going in and doing these negotiations with staff about entitlement work raises to a level of appearance of conflict?
I think it depends on how the firm has their conflicts of interest. I do not do land use entitlement work. I will tell you right now, I do utility, water rights, and administrative law. So you won't see me on the other side of the table. Whether one of my partners in the firm takes on one of those cases, we do have various degrees of conflicts checks. Mr. Keeley could probably discuss it a little more in depth, but we've gone through it since I've transitioned from NV Energy to make sure that there is no conflict of interest from my prior representation of them with my future representation of any other client. So we try to keep it as clear as possible
Mr.
who's
Anderson.
representing who.
Thank you.
Thank you. Justina, actually, I would like to direct mine to you as well, since we'd be considering you to be our counsel here on a regular basis. So obviously, we realize that one of the main roles is that of open meeting law and making sure that we're between the guardrails on that regard. But what I'd like to do also is kind of talk about a little bit beyond that. And what it is speaking on behalf of the vision of Tumwa, which is to enhance the quality of life in the Truckee Meadows by delivering exceptional customer-focused water services. As our council, what would be your primary focus on helping us to meet that vision?
Oh, that's a good one. I think in that statement, I like the focus on the community itself and the public. And you are working to make sure that the public water system is not only up to par with all the regulations, all the requirements, but also to try to keep rates as low as possible. Working for NV Energy, I can tell you, it's a hard balance to do the two, and I think it's a lot better coming from a local level. So I think by working with you on anything you need to do to ensure that that rate versus community involvement and making sure that you're providing the service you need to provide is what I would focus on.
So I have one final question that I'd ask, unless anybody else. We're asking you to potentially do a job that sounds crazy in this, that we want you to have the depth and institutional knowledge of somebody who's been so involved, but you're really not because you have no conflict, which, yeah, it's pretty much what we just asked you to do, which is hard, actually. I mean, I say that. We want to make sure that our job and what we do is clean and clear and definitely protects the public, as you mentioned, which I do like that focus. My question, though, in anybody that's coming in that we don't have a relationship with, what is your institution? And I say that not that you can't go call somebody. I appreciate that you brought your staff because it does tell the depth of what you do. But the truth is I can't have her run off on a telephone call and say, I don't know what to do right now. So I need to know your depth into the workings of what we do. I mean, we do talk about water law. We do come together and talk about larger things. And sometimes we have questions where we'll look over and say, hey, I'm out of my water here. I don't know what I'm doing. So with that said, do you mind speaking to the depth and institutional knowledge you bring to this table?
Sure.
On what we do?
I have been practicing law for 17 years in Nevada. The first 9 I was in Douglas County, I was a civil DA. So there I worked on public works. I represented their sewer and water system that the county had. I did HR. I wanted to practice water law, so any water case that came my way I took. The state engineer's position opened, so I went to the state engineer's office for 3 years. I was their primary attorney. I represented the state engineer throughout the state of Nevada in litigation, also in cases in front of the Ninth Judicial District Court, the Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court. After that, I worked for Great Basin Water Company for a year. I was their Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, was the title they gave me, mainly because I had that 1 year waiting period to practice law in water law after the state engineer. NV Energy poached me, so I went and I was a regulatory attorney for the last 4 years with NV Energy, mainly practicing in front of the Public Utilities Commission, as well as handling all of the water rights of NV Energy, which included, I think it was a little over a year ago, an agreement with NV Energy and Tumwa for drought service.
Thank you.
A little bit of everything.
It definitely sounds like it, but that could be a potential good fit. With that said, is there any other questions before I give one final statement for these? Because we're kind of we're trying to keep everyone on the same timeline, so trying to be fair to everybody. Do you have anything else you want to share before we're done here? Whoever.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes.
We do have 3.5 minutes.
We have 3.5 minutes? Very good. Because it's up there too. Okay. Now I know what I'm looking for. Thank you. So we do have 3.5 minutes, so we still have a little more time.
Well, and if you have additional questions, it's just that we are, we've added a layer of attorneys in our firm in the last 2 years. We're equally split along gender lines, and we now have a layer that we have of attorneys that we will see our firm well into the future and take over the management of our Reno office. we're excited about where we are with our firm, but we're also excited about this opportunity because we think it's a perfect fit for Justina to be the person sitting in that chair. So thank you for allowing us this opportunity.
So I'm going to add a question because we have time, and it has to do with something my colleagues bring up quite a bit. It's something that we've not experienced in Sparks quite as much as I know Reno has. And I say that of what is your intention in the future, if you could speak to it, because it sounds like you would know this as the vision of your company, of going out and finding developers. It was one of the questions, Ms. Breck's brought up, is that you start here, and the next thing you know, we find ourselves back in that spot where here we make a decision, and then maybe you're in front of us as a council pushing and standing with, do you guys make some guidelines to help keep you on track of who you represent? Because that's one of the reasons we're here in this conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, that's all part of our conflicts protocol. We also have strategic planning meetings where we identify areas of practice. One other area of practice that we're really not involved in Nevada is governmental affairs. And I could see where that would bump up against conflicts against this board as well. So we're really not very active. Would we like to do governmental affairs? I think we probably would, but our largest client doesn't want to see us on the opposite side of an issue down in the legislature, so we're not going to be doing governmental affairs. At best, we may appear at a county commission or a planning commission meeting for a one-off client. Now, I can tell you honestly that land use and development is not an area that we've identified specifically where we need to grow and we can't do the work unless we have the talent, and we'd have to go recruit the talent first. And then we have to carry them for a period of time before we fill them up with business, but we'd have to have that business. A lot of our commercial transactional real estate work does deal with real estate issues, but a lot of them most of it's located outside the Washoe County. Our mining companies are located, along the Humboldt River. And so a lot of our work is done in those counties and whatnot. But land use and developments just isn't something that's on our radar. Would we like to have that dimension down the road 10 years from now? Sure, it's lucrative, but we're just not there. And we haven't set a plan to be there.
No, I appreciate your vision and sharing that. That's actually very helpful, I think, to some of our colleagues for sure. With that said, any other questions before we're done? Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I gave you 1 minute and 20 seconds officially. You didn't take it, so it's not a big deal, but I don't want anybody to come saying something wasn't fair. I got my lawyer staring at me over here, so I'm doing my job. Thank you so much. It's so great to meet you and truly your team.
Thank you.
We're going to just take a moment break because I do know we'd had someone step out. So as we prepare, let's go ahead and just take a break for a moment. Thank you. So now we have Paul Liparelli, and how you doing, sir? So the way this works, we give you 5 minutes that you get to do your dance and song, and then we'll ask some questions, and we'll try to keep it even with everybody. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's nice to see you from this perspective. I get to see your whole faces, your smiles and your frowns. Sitting over there where I used to sit, I only saw the profile, so I might have missed some eye rolls and things like that. But I appreciate the chance to be here. I'm honored, actually, to be considered for the assignment, given the company that I'm in, some of the best law firms in town. I spent 28 years as a public lawyer, and 15 of them as board counsel, either with the Washoe County Board of County Commissioners or the Carson City Board of Supervisors. And it's a great fit because government is just kind of my thing. When I was a kid, my bedspread had the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the Liberty Bell and all sorts of symbols of government. And when I was in high school, I went to Boys State. When I was in college, I was a political science minor. I enjoyed, deep dive into government and Constitution when I got to law school. And I also did internships when I was in school in Carson City and in Washington, D.C. So when I got the chance to go to work for the Carson City DA's office in 1992, I really found my niche. Within a couple of years of joining the DA's office in Carson, I was the senior person in the civil division. So as a very young lawyer, I was board counsel to the elected board of supervisors. And I learned a lot from those folks. And it sort of helped me develop my philosophy as a public lawyer in recognition of the fact that those folks ran for office, and those folks get to make the policy for the local government. And it was my job to try to guide them through the legal landscape, being mindful of the fact that they're the policymakers and I'm the legal advisor. So when possible, I always try to facilitate their journey through the legal system. And only rarely was it necessary that I hold up a stop sign. And that's when I probably missed a few frowns and a few eye rolls along the way. But I grew up in Carson City. I went to high school there. And most of the folks that I knew from Carson, their moms and dads worked in government. So again, government has just sort of always been in my life. And through that, I gained a lot of respect for the public service. After 7 years in Carson City, where and let me say also, in Carson, everything is one big family. There's one fire service, there's one police service, there's one water service, one sewer service, one transportation. So I got kind of used to the idea that everyone's in the same boat. And then in 1999, when I came to work for the Washoe County District Attorney, one of my first assignments was regional planning. And that's when I realized it's not like it is in Carson everywhere else. But it sensitized me early to the different interests of the different local governments. And that experience served me very well throughout the rest of my career in the DA's office, where I worked on a lot of collaborative issues regionally. And one of them, ironically, was the creation of TUMWA. Washoe County, Sparks, and Reno did that to serve the community, and I was right there when it happened. So I have an interesting perspective on the agency because I was kind of there when it was born. So in that role as Washoe County District Attorney, I also worked on the public safety training facility, the regionalization of animal services, and in that process, again, I was reminded about the different interests of the different local governments and how important it is that the cooperation culture exists in those regional boards, like the TUMWA Board of Directors is a regional board. So that's a little bit about my experience as a public lawyer. Since I retired from the DA's office, I've started a small law practice, and I brought my entire staff with me today, if you've got any questions of them. Let me move into my approach to being board counsel. Very mindful of the fact that a government client is a special kind. Oop. My 5 minutes is up?
Yeah, but go ahead
All
and
right.
just wrap up.
Let me just
Final
wrap up by
thoughts, yeah.
saying, government client is a special kind of client, answerable to the voters, answerable to the, guided by the people who run for the office. So it's not like having other kinds of clients. And for all the years that I had a public agency client, I'm steeped in the importance of that, being mindful of that. And the last thing I'll say is there's an art to being board counsel. There's an art to being able to listen to the different perspectives and to try to help sort of mediate the different perspectives on a board. As board counsel to a public agency, you really are serving all the members, and you can't appear to be aligning with any one of them, or you'll lose the respect of the others. So it's a delicate dance, and I did it for a long time, and I feel like I'm good at it, and I'm ready to do it again.
Thank you, sir. Let's go and open it up for some questions. So we can start down with Ms. Breckus, and then
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Liparelli. So I'm asking a variation on the same question, but fine tuning to the proposer. And I don't know if mine is particularly applicable to you. And I've known you a long time. I mean, I was staff working for a jurisdiction in regional planning in 1998, so I think that's when I first kind of working with you. But at this point in time, well, here's the prelude, is as you kind of mentioned, the council sits up here with us. So in a public appearance is an equal to us. Certainly someone who has our, physically has our, well regard, because you're sitting up here with us, and is working for us. And my concern has been that perception that the audience and the public has can carry through to other matters outside of these tables, particularly in the clients that you may have that, say, go have a meeting with staff on the example I've been using, these complex water discovery new service issues related to a development. And staff is in a position of thinking, oh, well, the board is with him. He carries weight when he's making this proposal or that proposal. And I'm very uncomfortable with that, possibly because I have been staff. But my question to you is, do you have partners? You're a sole practitioner at this point in time?
I am,
Yes. And do you have other, you're not doing private sector development work, or do you plan to?
Most of my work in the last 2.5 years has been dedicated to other public agency clients, the RTC, the Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District. I'm standby counsel for Tumwa and sat with you all not too long ago. So that's primarily what I've done, but I do have a few private clients. I have one small developer that I reviewed a development agreement for. He was in the North Valleys. It involved Washoe County, and he sold the project, and I no longer represent him. So I do get calls from people who know that I worked many years in government and think that I might be able to help them. But unless it's a good fit for me, I have the luxury of being able to say no, which is not something I could ever do as a public lawyer. So not too many private clients, and very few that have anything to do with government.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to add to that. I do have an engagement with Lifestyle Homes that goes back 2 years that I was ready to help them with some things, but I haven't performed any services for them since then, and they've got a variety of legal assistance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Hill.
Thank you. I've been asking this same question of all of the folks before us, and with all of your broad experience, I'm sure you're going to pull a lot of different examples, but please describe a difficult situation you encountered representing boards or agencies and how you handled it.
Probably the hardest is when there's a real apparent disagreement on the board between two or more members. as counsel, you have to walk that line between them and try to give neutral, unbiased legal advice to the board as a whole. But you can sometimes tell, after all those years of sitting there, where the divisions are on the board. And the problem you have as a public lawyer is you give your advice in a public meeting. Unless you can convince the presiding officer to take a break and go have an attorney session, which is only appropriate under certain circumstances, you've got to give your advice to the people who are differing in the public setting. So diplomacy is very important, and ultimately, this is my safety net, fidelity to the law. I feel comfortable when I've reached a conclusion about providing a piece of advice that if the law's with me, some of the folks might not like it, but that's the best I can do as a lawyer, is rely on what I think the law says.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Thank you. So obviously your role for us, the primary objective here is to have you as our counsel when it is in regard to open meeting law. But what I wanted to do is ask a question kind of off of that a little bit, and it's along the lines of the vision that Tumwa has, which is to enhance the quality of life in the Truckee Meadows by delivering exceptional customer-focused water services. So my question to you is, as our counsel, how do you see, or what would you see as a primary focus in helping us to achieve that vision as a board?
It relates back to something that I said earlier about recognizing what my role is as the lawyer. The elected board sets the policy, and you have a mission statement that you just read. The staff is directed to carry out the objectives of the board. And the lawyer's job in a public meeting is to be mindful of those two roles and to try to assist as much as possible in getting the board and its staff to the places that they want to go. Occasionally needing to hold up a stop sign and say, for the sake of the agency, for the sake of the people, the customers, the law compels this certain direction, and that's what ultimately guides me in providing that advice. But I appreciate the fact that there's a culture at Tumwa and that your mission statement says what it says. I've been in strategic planning meetings with governing boards for many years. I've watched the process of creating goals and objectives. And so I have that in the back of my mind when there's an issue in front of the board that a little piece of legal advice relates to, and trying to get the agency to where it wants to go within the legal boundaries.
Thank you. Ms. Stewart?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi there. How are you doing?
Good to see you.
I wanted to ask about your water experience, since we're a water board. And the job is primarily about guiding our elected officials in making decisions, understanding where there's conflicts and all of that. But you did mention that you were participant in bringing, or I guess it was when the Department of Water Resources, was that the thing that you worked on?
Both the creation of Tumwa and the transaction from Sierra Pacific Power to the public authority, and then later the mergers of Washoe County Water Resources into Tumwa, STEMGIT into Tumwa. So I've been, and that's been an education in water law.
So that's what I was wondering. So what did you actually do? Like, were you drafting the agreement? Were you figuring out how to divvy up assets and liabilities? I mean, what was your role?
So each of those transactions had a lead counsel that did most of the drafting, and it wasn't the public lawyers that did that. But we had to review all those documents in depth with the teams that represented the agencies involved in the transaction. So we revised those agreements, commented on them, and in order to do so, to do it well, I had to have an understanding of the agency's mission, some understanding of water law, some understanding of labor law, all the things that are associated with combining those agencies, I was exposed to.
And then at the county, which was your most recent, have you had any specific water law cases? You know, things that came before the county? I don't really know.
Yeah, I have not litigated water law cases, but we have provided counsel to the county in registering objections with the state engineer to water applications. We have, as the county with water resources, we did acquire water rights, dispose of water rights. So I worked with water law lawyers in that process and had to become at least minimally competent in the field. I understand the boundaries, the general outline of water law, but I don't purport to be an expert. And I know Tumwa has water law lawyers, and so I'm not concerned that that's going to be a hindrance.
Well, that was my final question was, we are evolving a general counsel position, and then with the departure of Ms. Morris, it sounds like we're going to hire a internal general counsel, it sounds like, and then we have specialty counsel on water issues. But how would you see that relationship evolving? Or what would be your role with these other attorneys?
It would be much like the role that I've played for a long time as kind of a supervising lawyer. I wouldn't be supervising those other lawyers, but I would have that collaborative relationship with them, the lawyers that are advising staff on technical legal issues like water law. When it comes to the board's place to make a decision, my exposure to those issues gives me the background to be able to guide the board through that decision-making process. I looked through the last couple of years of agendas of the Tumwa board, and I know that a lot of what the board does is the work of a government agency, budgeting, approving grants, appointing members to other boards, rate making, making agreements, reviewing audits, disposing of property, and there is an occasional water rights transaction, but I know enough about it to be able to help you get through that.
Thank you.
Anything? Okay. Well, you answered a lot of my questions. I appreciate the questions, how they came out. I think you have a huge depth of a knowledge, and obviously we've called you before for other things. We've seen you with us and stand with us. The one question that's kind of obvious in the sense is what happens if you're chosen and you can't come to a meeting and your huge staff can't come either? So as you mentioned, what do we do at that moment? How does that work? And then with that said, how do you also maybe go find the information you need? I mean, obviously, I think you do. I think you're a very intelligent man. But at the same time, what's that process? How does that work?
Well, first on the potential absence, I thought that might come up. And so I did some thinking about how many meetings I missed in 12 years of being board counsel, and I think I could count them on one hand in 12 years. I know Mr. Folletta, who's been your counsel for a while, is reliable in his presence. I know Mr. Ponyi was, and so I'm committed to being available on the days that these meetings take place for the board and for the subcommittee and for the advisory board. And in the event I couldn't help an absence, like due to illness or an emergency or something, I would be able to reach out to a number of colleagues in the legal community who could fill in for me as standby counsel, much like the role that I'm playing now for the McDonald Carano firm. And then as to resources, I do have access to legal research resources, so if it was necessary for me to do research, I can and I do. And the network of public lawyers and private lawyers that I've created over 28 years gives me access to all sorts of people. And one of my favorite things to do later in my legal career was to be available to small town and small county DAs and city attorneys who knew that I'd been around a long time, and they called me for help. So I got a lot of favors out there, and I can call them back in, and I'm glad to have those relationships with the legal community where we can discuss ideas, protecting confidentiality always, but that's what lawyers do a lot.
Before we're done, is there any other questions from any of our council? You do have a couple minutes. If there's anything else you would like to share, is there any final things you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I would. I would like to say, I talked about the art of doing the job, and one of the things that's always in my mind, providing advice in a public meeting, is creating a record. And I like to help guide the board through decision-making processes where they've the board's made its decision based on information available in the record. And a few times in my experience, decisions began to happen where there wasn't an apparent basis in the record for some of those things, and that's when the red flags go up from the legal perspective. That's when you get exposed to challenges after the meeting. And so I like to remind the board of the standard for its decision-making, and I like to remind the board to get its decision made with a nexus to the record. And that helps a lot in ensuring against liabilities down the road.
I'd
So I
actually
want to
agree
keep you out of
there's-
trouble.
There's a wisdom in that, and I even appreciate anything you bring to that. Even just, I mean, one day, none of us will be here. There'll be a new group here, and they need to know a little bit of why we did what we did anyway. And so I think there's some wisdom in that approach, so thank you. Well, thank you for your time. You
Thank
do
you
have
very much.
47 seconds. You can do anything else.
I'll give it back to the chair.
Thank you so much. We have our final one, Fenimore, that is coming in. Welcome. So the way this is going to work is you're going to get 5 minutes to just kind of share who you are. Please give us your full name, and because we definitely have a bunch of information here, and then we'll ask some questions. Okay?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So it's good morning, and my name is Micheline Fairbank, and I'm an attorney with the law firm Fenimore Craig. First, we wish to express our appreciation for the opportunity to be considered as Tumwa's board counsel. I feel it's appropriate to share a little about Fenimore beyond what we have included in our proposal. Fenimore is a practice that has an extraordinary depth of skill and the highest standards of professionalism. As you may know, I recently joined Fenimore, and these are attributes that are incredibly important to me because a client not only retains me for my specific skills, but they retain the firm and our team. It's of paramount importance that we provide the highest quality work and service to our clients. With Fenimore, I'm confident that if we are selected as Tumwa's board counsel, we will provide unparalleled service to the board. So for me personally, I bring a unique set of skills and qualifications to the Tumwa board. I have extensive experience in natural resource laws and policies, including Nevada water quality and water allocation. I'm well versed in addressing water utility issues, having spent a portion of my early career advising rural water utilities throughout Nevada on compliance with Nevada's open meeting laws, compliance with state and federal water quality standards, addressing various matters, including water rates, board of director trainings, funding agreements for infrastructure improvements, among many other things that rural water utilities have to deal with, including complaints from the public. However, having the benefit of not only serving as an attorney representing government agencies, which is where I came from most recently, including the Division of Water Resources and the Division of Environmental Protection, I have experience working inside the agency, which for me affords me a different perspective because I understand the unique challenges from a multitude of different angles. I fully appreciate the importance of assuring an organization is compliant with all of their statutory obligations, not just open meeting law. And that experience has also shaped my viewpoint of the importance of the open meeting law, which really is intended to assure that there is an open and transparent government process. And for me, compliance with the open meeting law is sacrosanct. In addition, I have a broad civil practice background, having negotiated and drafted contracts on behalf of governmental entities, as well as the private sector. I have extensive experience providing legal guidance to government agencies, not only in response to legal actions that have been initiated, but understanding the obligations, risks, and potential liabilities and actions that can be taken to minimize the risk of litigation. And beyond this extensive experience in Nevada, my experience in Nevada water law and environmental laws and my civil practice background, my experience in water quality and quantity, I am experienced in handling issues within the jurisdiction of the National Environmental Policy Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, amongst many others. I have extensive familiarity with the Truckee River Operating Agreement and the operations within the terms of that agreement by the federal water master and in cooperation with the signatory parties. Engaging Fenimore as board counsel not only brings my experience and background to the Tumwa board, but the extensive experience of Richard Dreitzer, Dan Reeser, Wade Beavers, Derek Hoffman, and others who too have years of experience representing board counsel and state and local governments. Their experience too in administrative law and civil litigation really combines a depth of experience. That means, as I see it, there's unlikely an issue that we collectively haven't experienced at one time or another before. And that also gives us extensive ability to be able to advise the board on the most efficient and effective paths towards solution. The opportunity to work with an organization that I truly hold in high regard in our community is very exciting. I have seen the evolution of water utility services in the Truckee Meadow as a native Northern Nevadan, from isolated water utility services providers to the creation of Tumwa, consolidation of utility services, the negotiation and implementation of TROA, and then many other activities that Tumwa is involved in, which is really towards enhancing the quality of life in the Truckee Meadows by delivering exceptional customer-focused services. I hold past and present Tumwa leadership in high regard and often reflect on the many lessons I've learned from Tumwa's water resource planning principles over the years from my experiences in observing the work done by Mr. Foray, Mr. Enlow, and Mr. Zimmerman. And these are lessons I've been able to apply.
Kind of wrap up. We're kind of getting
Absolutely.
close to your time. Thank you.
So it would be a tremendous opportunity to serve the board council, and I stand ready to answer any questions.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing all that. You answered a lot of questions, I think. Let's go ahead and begin. We'll just go through. Ms. Breckus, you want to go ahead and begin? We'll just kind of go through our pattern we've been doing.
Yeah, sure. I am asking a variation on the same question to all of our candidates with some customization. And I don't think I've worked, I know I haven't had any interaction with you. I don't think so, but I have some knowledge of your firm. But my question, introduced is, the board council sits over here physically on the same level as us, and very collegial experience up here. And I think the public perceives it so. And part of the public can also be staff. And one of the concerns I've had, and I think I've pointed to examples in my mind, I think at this point I'm the longest serving board member here, but is that the fact that it is acknowledged that the person who sits here has the trust of the board, if they or one of their partners, with whom they have a combined economic interest in the partnership, then goes off into other meetings with staff, advocating, for example, through our complex discovery process for new service areas, where it's highly negotiated, highly technical, concerned that can be an appearance of conflict of interest, that the firm that's here with the board is also taking business on behalf of another client into negotiations with staff. I know that in your field, you have ethical considerations bound by the bar. We have the Nevada ethics laws. We'll have board rules and the contract, but I'm really trying to zero in on that conflict of interest. And I did note in your proposal that your firm represents a fair amount of developers. Do you share a concern that if one of your partners go in and trying to pitch, lobby a discovery, that that could be an appearance of undue influence?
So I think, it was noted earlier today, Nevada's a small state, and there's very few, opportunities where we're not going to go ahead and people are going to bump elbows and have, similar, crossing paths. And that includes within an organization or a firm such as ours that has, a diverse, client portfolio. But the reality is twofold. Is number one is presently we don't identify that there's any conflicts. Number two, if an event comes up, one of the things that, I spent a decade in private practice before I went to the state, and here I am back in private practice. One of the things that's really impressive to me is Fenimore's, extremely high standards when it comes to conflict of interest and how they go ahead and approach those different things. And so I think there's mechanisms that we take it very seriously in terms of public perception. And there's different mechanisms in order to do that. So we have our conflicts process that we undertake in terms of looking at that. We also have shielding provisions. When I joined Fenimore, there's certain matters that I'm unable to access or have any communications relating to because that could potentially present a conflict of interest. So we have those mechanisms built into place to allow shielding and preservation of the integrity of the process. Communication is foremost, but I think it's also one of those things that, there's mechanisms in order to work around that, but communication, being forthright, and disclosure is absolutely paramount in that process.
Thank you. Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. I've been asking the same question as well of all the candidates. Please describe a difficult situation you encountered representing boards or agencies and how you handled it.
I thought about this, and there's lots of different opportunities to share different experiences. I think one of the challenges that I had in terms of my representation of an agency is when you recognize that there's a potential issue. You engage in conversation with that client with regards to that potential issue and appropriate mechanisms in order to accomplish, move forward, to try to mitigate the risk, mitigate the outcome, mitigate the problems that may arise under that. And and in that particular experience, I had a client that was not so inclined to go ahead and follow what I believe to be sound legal advice. And that was very challenging because my role was to go ahead and keep them from stepping into something that they didn't want to step into. They disregarded the legal advice. And so as a consequence, the issue did arise, unsurprisingly. So it was, but it also, it was challenging, but it was like, okay, well, guess what? Here we are. Can't unring the bell. Past is a past. It's not a moment where you're going to walk in there and be like, I told you so. It was a moment to walk in and say, okay, we foresaw this. Let's figure out now how are we going to deal with it today. And it was an opportunity to reiterate, it's important to listen to the advice of counsel, but we can't unring the bell. So let's go ahead and come up with the best mechanism to address the problem moving forward. And so it was challenging. It wasn't the most fun experience, but we moved through it. And now it's history.
Thank you.
I'm going to pause you. Kathleen Taylor has a question.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm asking this question. Thank you for being here because you brought it up in your opening remarks, and it is in regards to TROA. How would you describe TROA and what it means to Tumwa?
So it's one of those things is I could go on. I love TROA, and I could totally nerd out on it. It's one of those agreements, the history of it, the negotiations of it. I loved when I had opportunities to sit down with Roland Westergaard and just listen to him talk about the history and the processes they went through. But being respectful of the time, what does TROA mean for Tumwa? Certainty. In a word, TROA means certainty. There was so many different challenges. There was also additional claims from the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. There was the environmental and natural resource concerns. And what TROA did, and it took a really long time, but I look at TROA as being an opportunity that created certainty for all of the water users in terms of accessibility of water, the time and manner of use of water, better ability to go ahead and manage and balance the use of storage rights, storage water upstream, and also then creating mechanisms that have enhanced our fisheries and enhanced the natural resources. So to me, TROA was this really interesting and innovative way of taking challenges that are being faced throughout the West with regards to water issues and water conflicts and too many claims and not enough water to go around, and having the different parties come to the table and think about a different way of skinning the cat that still fit within that prior appropriation construct established under the Ordich Decree.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. So what I've been saying, the same thing to all the proposals as well, but I just wanted to say the same thing for you, that obviously the main reason you're here is helping us to stay between the guardrails on open meeting law. But kind of aside of that is our vision and focusing on the vision of Tumwa, which is to enhance the quality of life in the Truckee Meadows by delivering exceptional customer-focused water services. So as our council up here, how could you best help us to meet that vision?
So I look at it as kind of a two-prong process. The first prong is making sure that there's a good relationship between the board and staff, because the board is not successful in reaching its mission if there's not a good relationship with staff and staff has confidence and comfort in the board. And that also means that the organization, the people that are doing the work within Tumwa have to know that they're getting the support both financially, but also in terms of kind of that recognition that the board, if they're doing their job in the direction that the board is guided, that they're getting that the board is backing them on that. And that really comes from my experience of working within the state agency, is you have people that are setting your guiding principles, and you want to go ahead and meet your mission, but how do you do that? So the first prong is making sure that you have a really good communication and relationship with staff. And I see board council is helping to be part of that dialogue. Obviously, it's not solely based upon board council. But the other side of it too is when you're looking at your community, is it's creating trust and confidence in the work that the board is doing. So when you're talking about operating within the lane of the open meeting law, well, if you're operating and you're in compliance with the open meeting law, things that are coming up in front of public meetings is open, transparent. The public has an opportunity to participate and voice their interests and concerns. That then also helps instill that. And the other piece of it is also being cognitive of the vision that Tumwa has. There's some really incredible projects that Tumwa is undertaking throughout the region, and being supportive of that and how that is innovated and supportive of creating this community, I think also is part of that intersection of those relationships.
Thank you. Ms. Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. Hi there. I just wanted to ask a couple questions. One, I was intrigued in your role, looking at your bio at the state engineer's office, and I was wondering if you could tell us when that was and what you did there.
So I was a deputy administrator with the division, and so my responsibility was I oversaw the hearings and adjudications program section, so I have extensive familiarity with our adjudications and pre-statutory processes. For a while, I oversaw our water rights section and the administration of the water rights. But, as deputies come and go, those, things shifted. I was also responsible for the development of the agency budget, which I inherited, which was a really big eye-opening experience because I went to law school.
Yeah.
And we go to law school because we don't like math. Well, okay, like 80% of us, that's the rule. So those were kind of the primary things. And then I also worked with our water planning and drought resiliency program that got stood up. I believe it was in the 2019 legislative session. And so I worked with Bunny and her team to help get that going.
Okay, thank you. And then taking the next step, so it's a version of what we've been asking. We're trying to understand about what activities your firm has, either you specifically or other members of your firm, in the land use and development field. And it could be representing clients in front of any of our jurisdictions, Reno, Sparks, Washoe County, or it could be in something that doesn't happen in front of the councils, which is the negotiation of the water rights with Tumwa for a client. Do you do any of those things?
So with regards to the negotiation of Tumwas and the, either doing banking agreements or the sale of water rights to Tumwa, I'm not aware that our firm does any of that.
Okay.
With regards to, land transaction development projects here in Nevada, particularly in this area, there are some different organizations that we represent. We do represent some developers and business owners, I'm trying to think, owners of real property and buildings
Right.
and those different types of
I was
things.
thinking of zoning, entitlement work, planning commission.
So I, to the best of my knowledge, and again, I do have to say that, it's, but to the best of my knowledge, no, we do not have that's not an extensive component of what we're
And
doing.
do you think that you might get into that? And what about you personally?
So in terms of zoning and planning, probably that's not necessarily going to be my area of laser focus. My laser focus is really, I like doing the government, working with government entities, government affairs. And then I also really do enjoy doing the natural resources work.
And then how long have you been with them? Did you say with Fenimore?
So I joined Fenimore at the beginning of April.
April. Okay, and would you be the person that would be serving as the board counsel, I'm assuming?
I would be your person. I would be the one that would be on speed dial for you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just ask the final question and then give you a moment just to kind of end out. So to me, what happens if you can't come, and who do you send someone from your firm? How does that work? How would you function? You obviously have a lot of depth. You have a lot of knowledge, and so appreciate you sharing. But just some of the practical side of it, how does that work for you?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, we have numerous attorneys in the office that we represent multiple different agencies throughout the state of Nevada. So if I was unable to attend, there would be somebody else that could go ahead and stand in my stead. Obviously, we have, like I said, there's Wade Beavers, Dan Reeser in our Reno office. We've got Derek, and so we do have other individuals. Additionally, so I don't foresee that as being an issue. The other side of it is, absent a few things, I tend to schedule my life around my work and not my work around my life. So.
Okay. You have 20, take a moment. You have anything you want to close out with?
No, I really do appreciate this opportunity. It really is a pleasure. And it's, like I said, I have the utmost respect for Tumwa and the organization and the board. And so it would be an honor. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, good job. I know if you want to go ahead and guide us into this next step of what we're going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Folsom will hand out the paper ballots. So again, select your top 3 candidates, 1, 2, 3, and then I will read each board member's ballots into the record. We'll also give you a score sheet so you can keep track of that. And then Ms. Folsom, at the end, will also tally all of your ballots just so you know the total of the votes. At that point, you'll then go into deliberation, consider the candidates, and then make a motion to engage one of those candidates.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I thought at Western we had discussion first and then did the tallies.
Well, we're going to. Well, we can truly do anything we want, I think. But the reason we were thinking this is that we'll kind of have our tally, and then we'll know. Then we can talk about it. Would you guys prefer the opposite? It doesn't matter to me.
Well, I'd like to hear my colleagues' input before I make a final.
Well, if that's the case, because we can do it either way. But if that's the case, I don't know that I want to have a second whole discussion about what happened here. And so just know that. So if you just do your top 3, then we can have the conversation about that. I honestly think that's probably a better way to go than the opposite, because then we can kind of narrow it down and just talk about who those, I mean, we're not voting. We're voting, but we're not voting. We're not actually making any, you're not stuck on anything you wrote. And even if we want to bring up someone we didn't bring up and we change our mind, just gets us on the right trail. Are you guys comfortable with?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I don't want any discussion. I'm not trying to push that.
Oh. No, I already did mine.
That's the scorecard.
Oh, okay.
A different form? Okay, that's fine.
I'll take this.
Well, I can do this
No,
one.
no, no, no.
Oh.
This is your ranking.
Oh.
1, 2, 3. You
Yeah.
have 1, 2, 3?
Well, I have a tie.
Okay, then I will take that, and then this is the scorecard that you will tally everybody's rank
Okay.
when you're done. Oops, sorry. Didn't mean to step on
Throwing
that.
my cane around, huh?
Mine and Kathleen, you're fine.
Oh, yeah, this is just.
So this will be Director Paul Anderson votes. So the number 1 candidate, McDonald Carano. Number 2 candidate, Fenimore. Number 3 candidate, Liparelli Legal Service. This will be Vice Chairman Christopher Dare. First place candidate, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. Second place, Liparelli Legal Service. Third place, McDonald Carano. Director Naomi Doer. First place, Fenimore.
Well, I have a tie.
And a tie with Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. And then number 3 would be Liparelli Legal Service. Member Kathleen Taylor. Number 1, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. Number 2, Fenimore. Number 3, McDonald Carano.
Can you sorry, I'm trying to keep up.
Yeah, go back to
Yes,
Sorry.
you're going kind of quick, trying to keep up.
So member Kathleen Taylor, number 1 vote, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. Number 2, Fenimore. Number 3, McDonald Carano. Member Alexis Hill. Number 1, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. Number 2, Liparelli Legal Service. Number 3, Fenimore. Member Garcia, number 1, McDonald Carano. Number 2, Fenimore. And number 3, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. And member Breckus, number 1, Liparelli Legal Service. Number 2, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. And no number 3 vote.
What was her number 3?
No, number 3.
No vote.
Okay,
Could you go back to the beginning?
Sure, and I'll check with Ms. Folsom and see if she has them tallied yet. If not, I can go back through.
Could-
Okay. So again, Board Member Paul Anderson. Number 1, McDonald Carano. Number 2, Fenimore. Number 3, Liparelli Legal Service. Chairman Christopher Dare. Number 1, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. Number 2, Liparelli Legal Service. Number 3, McDonald Carano. Board Member Naomi Doer. Number 1, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer, and Fenimore. And then the number 3 vote would be Liparelli Legal Service. Member Kathleen Taylor. Number 1, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. Number 2, Fenimore. Number 3, McDonald Carano. Board Member Alexis Hill. Number 1, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. Number 2, Liparelli Legal Service. Number 3, Fenimore. Board Member Garcia. Number 1, McDonald Carano. Number 2, Fenimore. Number 3, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. Board Member Jenny Breckus. Number 1, Liparelli Legal Service. And number 2, Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. And no number 3 vote on that one.
Okay, let's go ahead and have a conversation. And the thing that we want to do is we want to solve here. And this time, I'm going to I normally will rarely speak first, but let me just kind of share a little bit of my thoughts that might guide us a little bit, because this is an interesting conversation to be had at large. So my thought is, we had some great people in front of us. I think any of them could do the job. I don't think there's anything here that would not be great. So every candidate, I think, kudos to you. I mean that. But we are finding it's more of a practical problem than a legal problem of some of the feelings and some of the actual practical in front of us in other boards that we're having. And so because of that, it makes me stop and say, okay, how do I, as a board chair, or how do I, as a fellow chairman, help take away some of the confusion or problems that keep happening and seem to be coming up inside of our businesses, inside of our city business or our county business. So because of that, I sat back and I looked, and the reason I ended up choosing Parsons as number one is, as I do think that they bring something to the table of a depth. They're new to us, but at the same time, they do have quite a large depth. Liparelli, we have a lot of relationship with him. We know what we're getting there, and so those would be my top two. McDonald Corrado, I think, has done a fantastic job, but that continues with the issues that some of my colleagues have. And then I do believe in Fenimore, and please do know, I just think, to me, I think you are on the same level of McDonald Corrado in that sense, that I think eventually we'd have some of the same things, and I would not want to put you or us back in that situation. This is just my perspective off the little bit that I got to talk. But I do think solving that, the more we can take away things that seem to take away from our job as running water, is a better idea. So that's my thought. That's why I voted how I did. But I don't mind just going down. We'll just start with breakfast and just walk down, say
Yeah.
what you want to say, and then we'll deliberate and be done.
Yeah, this was a really great process. Along those lines, I heard a lot of, Nevada's a small place and so on, but I think there's business models that are problematic as we become a more complex community, a more competing interest community. And that is, while a firm like McDonald Corrado says they have a public ethos, and I have no doubt about it, it's just very difficult to do public sector representation and private sector representation and even hold those positions. I've been watching the Nevada Commission on Ethics. McDonald Corrado has a person sitting on that board, and that person has routinely had to recuse from matters, very serious matters to this region that come before the Board of Ethics because they do business with some of the subjects of the ethics matters. And I just think that it is very challenging to be a firm that integrated with the public sector and then also have private sector interests. And I see that a little bit with Fenimore also, who saw in their proposal too. So I put those two in the same category. And I'll let my colleagues know that we had a matter that came up not that long ago, this discovery issue of the St. James issue, and we sat in a way we've never sat before in the years I've been here, and it was real insight to the mechanics of the administrative activities that go on at this body. And to me, seeing how those who have interest in our policies or our administrative actions have to hire counsel and bring on counsel, those sort of people who did that work in those settings really should not also be representing our body. And I can't recall if whether there were a lot of parties involved representing multi-parties, but we really do need those bright lines, in my view. Now, having said that, I went with Mr. Liparelli because, but I also put the other one second, Parsons, because one, I don't see that their business model is representing private sector development clients, but that's not to say that that book of business would not grow by this. And if they are the ones who get it, I think a real hard line needs to grow to be put down, because they could bring on a land use entitlement person. And next thing we know, that person is walking our city halls, our chambers, talking about development issues that, oh, by the way, also need water service. But I also saw that they had broad water expertise that our general manager could rely upon, but he also has another stable of water attorneys too. So that's why I didn't put them number one, because I don't really think, and I haven't heard, that we need this office, this position, to bring in all that other expertise. I think he has the administrative authority to do that. But one thing that has come up, and why I really think Paul Liparelli was the choice and should be the choice, is one, the open meeting law has changed a lot. And I've been very involved in the last year, okay? You all probably know about the open meeting law, spirit of the law violation that the jurisdictions had last June. It was just a ruling from the Attorney General's office. There were 3 bills going down this session, and they're going to be a whole new different open meeting law. It's changing a lot, and I think Mr. Liparelli, with his experience on it, and sitting with boards over those years is really going to help this board with that next movement. And a lot of that movement is related to remote participation and so on. And I'll also just say one last thing is, just like Ms. Stewart did today with Mr. Ferguson and had to discuss a personal conflict issue, when he sat as side counsel for the St. James issue because McDonald Corona could not participate, I had an issue I had to talk to him about. It was related to my spouse, someone he supervises whose spouse was involved in this matter. And I spoke with him maybe a half-hour conversation, and he really relied upon what I see of 25 years of experience with us individually, but then also the board individually helping to noodle on those conflicts, which are all Nevada ethics laws. So I argue for a more narrowed selection, and that's why I thought Mr. Liparelli was our good choice on the changes we're seeing in the open meeting law, the assistance we needed individuals with our conflict, and knowing that our manager also has the latitude to pick and choose who he wants to bring on other water matters that the body needs. Thank you. That was long.
I'm really not trying to rush you, but I just want to.
Yeah.
I just want to kind of keep going. Sir.
So my number one choice was McDonald Corona. I believe that the depth of their organization, that yes, and we've talked about it, a lot of the groups in this area are interacting with different developers, different businesses, different individuals that can potentially be a conflict of interest, but the depth of the organizations are enough that they can separate themselves from a conflict of interest. I believe that we've been well represented by Mr. Falletta, and yes, the transition could have gone a little bit smoother, but I personally believe that that's our best choice. Also, on the fiscal responsibility side, if you look at the fee schedules for them, they were also the least expensive of all of our options. So with that in mind, that was my.
What was your number two?
Number two was Fenimore.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just one quick note, Mr. Chair. Mr. Falletta let me know that he had to go pick up his daughter at childcare, so he meant no disrespect, and he wanted me to let the board know that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Ms. Stewart?
Yeah, thank you. I went with the firms that I thought both had a depth of experience, broad-based, and I was very impressed with both Parsons and Fenimore in terms of their water background that they might be called upon. I know we've talked about what is the future of our water council, in terms of their longevity. But I was very, that said, so I liked a little bit bigger firm that had the flexibility to just call someone in on a moment's notice. That said, and I noted this on my form, that between the two, I would probably give the nod to Parsons. And it is because they have the least amount of conflict. It's been a big issue for me. I'm 9 years into this job. And it's happened over and over again, both in the lobbying arena and in the just the representation of developers and those kind of things. I want to know that our attorney is front and center with us, and that's just been very important to me. That said, we can't be their only client ever. I mean, they've got to have a big book of business. Parsons did note that they would adjust their fee schedule, and I didn't know what that looked like because I also looked at the fees to make sure, are we getting some good bang for buck? So that's where I would come down is, it can't be a tie, and we have to pick someone. So I would lean towards Parsons, just so you know. My second, again, would be Fenimore, and my third was Mr. Liparelli. Has incredible, extensive experience, and I think he'd do a great job. I just, this is just how I felt about it. So.
Thank you so much. Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I put Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer first because they really showed as a organization that they want this. They came down with the group, and I was really impressed. I understand that there would be one person that would be coming to this board, but I was impressed with the commitment to Tumwa and to showing that, we're here for the resources that you may need. And I was impressed also with Justina, who would be sitting up here with us, and I felt like we'd be guided with good representation. But I also put Liparelli as number two. I think his experience is incredible, and I would also lean on his experience and trust his wisdom. And I thought he made a really compelling argument at the end saying, I'm going to help you make that record. And I feel like that's sometimes missing on boards that I'm sitting on, certainly not this board, but that push to ensure that we're looking for the future and that balance of, listening to the board, but also stepping in at the appropriate time and having that experience. So, and again, all of the folks represented were really incredible, and I feel honored that we were able to sit and do this exercise.
Thank you so much. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. Not an easy exercise, and thank you for your time. I'm looking at this from a brand-new perspective, so I looked at the proposals and I looked at the interviews. I don't have a ton of history, as my other colleagues do, and in my opinion, there were two firms that significantly stood out, and those were Parsons and Fenimore, based on all of the materials, and the reason being is Parsons, when they came for their presentation, they immediately hit on all of the questions that were being asked up here by the group. I believe that they answered the conflict of interest question very successfully and compelling. I felt like they had a depth of services that would serve this board well, and I believe the same can be said for Fenimore. So I would just end with, I think either two of those firms, all four of the firms would be a great match, but those two stood out above for me, clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the process. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm obviously filling in for Commissioner Andriola, and I have very limited experience in terms of the histories of law firms, and so I'm just kind of taking the information that was provided to me today. Excellent candidates, excellent presentations. I really, it stood out to me that McDonald Carano had the 20 years of service to Tumwa. I really enjoyed Mr. Falletta's demeanor and his presentation, and so that's why I put them as number one. Micheline, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I really enjoyed your energy and excitement. You kind of perked up right at the end there when we did start diving into the water issues, and so I think that level of experience and excitement really drew me in, as did the Parsons team. Your depth of knowledge and your diverse experiences on your team, and you being here today stood out to me. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much. So I think we're ready to make a motion, and I think we kind of have heard where most people sit, but is there a better way to do anything than you do here besides just call for a motion?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll give you a little bit of structure, and then Mr. Ferguson can interject and add to it. But I think the motion that I put in the board packet would be the motion to direct staff to negotiate an engagement letter for board council representation with the law firm of your choice, consistent with their proposal, to be signed by the board chair. So the engagement letter, once it was negotiated consistent with the proposal, that would be signed by the board chair, and then they would be board council at that point. And then as further direction, it would be a motion that if we for some reason cannot negotiate an engagement letter with your number one firm, that you would pick a number two and a number three, and we would go through them in the event we could not negotiate with the number one firm.
So before we actually make this, I do want to thank everyone for coming. I can tell you, without question, your passion reminds me why we do what we do, and I would say even the same with Fenimore. You definitely are a very good cheerleader for what we try to accomplish. So do understand, as we process this, we do our best to make the best decisions we can with all the pieces in our mind and heart. And so, did you have a question?
I really, top-ranking Parsons?
Yeah, that's the top. That's the top.
I raised early, and I've been on the longest, I think, the McDonald Carano activities, outside of their contract, letters from Michael Pogny about, in the city of Reno and water and so on. And so, I raised those questions when we talked about general counsel. But since I've been raising those questions for about 6 years, I've also come to realize how many other attorneys Tumwa relies upon. And I didn't understand that originally. And so the parameters for hiring on a firm, particularly because it's Parsons that brought the most people here today and is multifaceted, and that's what I heard the questions reaching into. I heard justification for the appointment or the engagement. It leaves me really wanting to understand what all they're going to do to the exclusion of others and our general manager's ability to hire others. And I'm left really with a bigger question, because he says consistent with their proposal, engage them consistent on their proposal. I don't know if it's part of this direction to him or if it's a future agenda item, but I think we need a roadmap or a schematic on who we hire, who we have on, and what necessarily does this engagement mean in terms of other functions that they bring, because clearly they're bringing a lot of other functions that the board has embraced.
Part of that, I think some of that's already answered. I think we've kind of had the conversation. This is my opinion, so I'm just going to share what I think you just. It actually is a very narrow scope of what we're asking. And so with it, there's nothing more that's being asked. There's nothing of replacing anything that we have as of now. I can tell you we're always breathing and we're always growing and we're always walking forward. It is nice to have counsel who has a depth. There's nothing wrong. Matter of fact, without any depth, it makes you question why we'd have them here. And so with that said, I understand what you're saying, but I think that it's very clear what the question, what we're voting on today has to do with just our council.
See, I'm not so sure about that, because
But it is. That is our.
Well, the contract's going to be what the contract is. And as Mr. Folletto said, it has changed. And, unfortunately, I was thinking about this when I was preparing, is maybe the existing, a sample contract should have been attached to the board. Because I've read it, and it's very broad. And it's actually different than what you said is very narrow, in what we asked for. So, I have trust in our manager to do a good contract, but a lot of time it is good to have a sample contract before you. But maybe it's just a future discussion.
I can also help with this. I'll help make sure. I say this, that if there's anything in a contract that does anything different than we just talked about, I guarantee that ought to be a conversation to be had. So let's go into this. Go ahead, one more, and then please, I want to give it back to you.
So how I see this in the past, I've been on this board, I guess, going on 9 years. I think this is, whoever we pick is a firm that we can lean into for other services. I don't think there's any reason to eliminate them from providing other services. And if we know them and they're doing a good job, and let me give you some examples. That's why I asked about water. I was if we're talking about Parsons, I was impressed that they had personnel background. Sounds like Fenimore does too. But I had a personal experience where Tumwa was engaged in a lawsuit. We had to go through depositions. McDonald Carano actually did the litigation. So although they were our board counsel, they also handled the litigation. And we ended up being exempted out of that or recused from the litigation. So I could see going to whatever firm. That's why I picked the two firms I did. That I thought they had some depth there that we could plumb, so to speak.
So I'm gonna turn off us because I think we've all said a lot of things. So, John Zimmerman, is there anything else you want to share or?
Yeah, just for clarity, when we talk about consistency with their proposals, so this board agenda item, the scope for the request for proposal was for board counsel representing the board in this meeting, our legislative subcommittee, and also our our citizens standing advisory committee meeting. Nothing excludes hiring Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer, or engaging them on other matters internal to TUMWA. We make that selection internal based on the best candidate and the experience they have with a particular area of law. But for this agenda item, it's limited to just the scope. And engagement letters, I have some familiarity with them, being a former practicing attorney. They're fairly standard, but the consistency with the proposal would basically be the person who is going to be here representing the board, their billable hour rate, and then their conflicts of interest principles and policies.
If I could ask, so you might have separate engagement letters with them, say, to do something else.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
So I think we're ready for a motion. Is there anything you want to share? Okay, thank you. So I think we're ready for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to direct staff to negotiate an engagement letter for the board legal representation with Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer to be signed by the board chair. If an engagement letter is not able to be negotiated with the top candidate, then staff should negotiate with the second-ranked candidate, and so forth until one is negotiated and signed.
Do I have a second?
I think you get,
I have a second. Any more discussion?
well, I think we need to identify
The
who
second?
the second and the third candidate are in the event that a contract cannot be negotiated with the first.
I would say Liparelli for second and third for Fenimore is my motion.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do I have a second on the amended?
Second.
There's a first and a second on the table, and we can do this a couple times. You don't have to agree with everything. I'm just saying, don't feel like you're pressured. We want everyone, as much as we can, you get a majority here.
And was there a third?
Huh?
Who was the third?
The third was Fenimore.
Okay.
And so a first and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
So we have one nay, but it passes with a majority. So thank you so much. We thank you to all the candidates, and we appreciate it. I say this without question. Please continue to support Tumwa. We're here to support you, no matter where it ends up sitting. And I know with some of what we do, Mr. Liparelli, that I'm sure you'll be around. We get to hang out with you because of other things you do and with us as well. So, very good. We're going to go ahead and move on. Okay, we are now on to number 10, review and discussion and possible direction to staff amendments. I do realize it's 12:40, so we are getting long.
Mr. Chairman, that was my item. I can be super quick. Super quick.
Without
unless you-
question. Well,
Yes.
I'm not going to cut that one, but I am going to ask that we take the legislative, set it aside, if you guys would be okay with that. Do I need to take a vote on that?
Yes, you do, motion.
So can I have a motion that we go ahead and remove 11 for another day?
So moved.
I have a first. Second, any discussion?
I have a question. Are there any bills, I mean, we've been meeting in our committee, are there any bills that you need our guidance on before Friday?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. So let's go ahead and jump into 10. And with that said, go ahead.
Thank you so much, and I know this has been such a long meeting. After looking at our bylaws, I see that there is no guide on how we elect chair and vice chair, and I'm hoping if I could just give staff a little bit of a guide on what we could do for that, and then that could just be brought back. And we don't, unless people disagree with me, certainly, but I was hoping we could state when those elections are, and then also state that it's a rotational election between the three jurisdictions. That's the only thing I'm requesting as part of the bylaws.
And the one thing I do want to be very cognizant of, because I don't want anybody to feel tricked or any of that, is our next meeting, we will be choosing for the next chair. With that said, we're not here to talk about that today. I'm not trying to anything. But I don't want anybody all of a sudden to feel like, well, if I'd have known that, I would have ... With that said, one of the things I think it's a bigger discussion and it's worthy to have. We've already, to disclose, a lot of us serve on other water board earlier that we already talked a little bit about this, even on that board, because it's kind of a whole conversation that comes together. But in pertaining to what we do, I think it's in the hearts, it seems, of most of us to be okay with the idea of some of that. So I think I'm okay with a conversation to come that continues to walk down that path. If you guys all are, because I think there's nobody here that's really trying to, if you guys are okay with that, then I would prefer that as well. Then we won't feel like we're rushing the conversation. Because there's a few other pieces to it that I want to bring up, if that's the case, of how we handle that.
Let me ask Ms. Hill, would you like them to bring a proposal, or would you just you want to put out your preference and then have the discussion next time?
That's fine too.
What were you wanting?
I guess I was hoping we'd have more time. We don't. I think that I just wanted the board to know that proposal. Commissioner Garcia actually has been a strong advocate of, making sure all the jurisdictions get their fair chance. And so it's something that we at Washoe County believe, and we're happy to be last in line because we've been getting a very fair chance from Washoe County to be chair. So that's the only thing that I just wanted to bring to the board, and it can come back in a proposal, but it sounds like the chair wants to have more discussion, which we can do as well.
One of the things that I think staff could do is put together a proposed idea, and then we'll discuss what they come up with. So it's a little bit of balance of both.
I like that.
But it wouldn't be stuck. We can change anything, but at least they'll have the
Starting
language,
point.
they'll have the ideas, and they can put in there, and then we can say, we like that, we don't like that. Let's add a tail to it. So, that make sense?
That
Do you feel
does.
like-
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. Then we're going to go ahead and close that then. We're not going to have any more discussion on that. Do you need us to
Do you
vote?
need a motion to bring this item back on a
Thank you.
future agenda?
Can
I'll
we have
make
a,
that motion to bring it back on a future agenda item and for the staff to at least provide a starting point for the discussion.
we have a first? Do I have a second? Have a second? Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I see none. Okay, we're going to go general manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just really quickly, first of all, thank you to Councilmember Taylor and Commissioner Garcia, Vice Mayor Reese, and Commissioner Andriola. Owe you a debt of gratitude for slugging it through this meeting, what we appreciate it. And then also wanted to thank staff. We had a tremendous outcome at our Smart About Water Day a few weeks ago. Robert Charpentier and Sonia Folsom put in a ton of work, and we got a very good showing from all the local agencies involved in water, including NDOT and DEP and others. So I just want to thank them for that. Appreciate it.
On that note, I had one of our Sparks residents come up to me and they said they went to that and it blew their mind in a good way.
Oh, me too.
That's what I'm telling you. Yeah. So what you did was good, and hopefully we can get more people in there because they really are advocates. They even said, why did the news keep saying this if this is what's going? So the very thing we keep saying. So good job. Anything else, sir?
We hope to see you next time.
That was Andy Gephardt that said, we hope to see you next time, officially on the record. Just, what are you doing yelling from what's wrong with you? Okay. Any board comments, requests? I'm sorry, public comment. Public comment. Anybody have a public comment? Anybody? You get 3 more minutes if you'd like. And then I don't see any. So board comments and requests for future agenda items. Okay. And we are adjourned. Thank you all.